welcome to NTV. This is our forum and a debate on fiscal and monetary policies for economic recovery. We want to thank you for joining us. We want to thank you that you've been waiting. We're very grateful that it's going to be a good conversation about what next should we be doing as individuals, as households, as businesses, as a country. And we'll be running through smoothly with a panel that will be introducing, or will be introducing themselves later. It's dangerous to introduce big people, but we want to appreciate that you have joined us. As we have said, this is about the fiscal and monetary policy. Yesterday, the President gave a statement, State of the Nation address, which we shall be touching on. You have also been out there struggling. People have just come out of the lockdown. Some, in a sense, are still in a lockdown. Some taxis haven't been able to register to bring their taxis back on the road. Even those who have brought their taxis back on the road are really struggling because they are being told you have to carry fewer people. You have not passed here, you can pass there. We still have curfew, so we need to be home, in some cases earlier than we thought we should be. But that is how Corona has shaped our world, and we need to continue moving through this world. This conversation is really sponsored by quite a number of good people. Frederick Ebert Foundation want to appreciate the support that they have made this possible for us to have comfort. And for that reason, I decided to put on a yellow shirt, the color of the German flag. It's also the Ugandan flag. So never mind, we share those good things with the Germans. We want to appreciate their support. Bank of Uganda, we want to appreciate the support that they have given to us. And many others as will be running through and going through them along the way. It's just a starting point. But this School of Economics, Macquarie University, is a major sponsor and literally the host of this conversation. And I want at this point to invite the Dean, who will be giving us a recorded message because of social distancing. I'm sure he would have loved to be here, but let's invite the Dean to give his opening remark, and then we'll go through the panel and we'll be hitting the road and starting work. Fred Muhomza is my name, just in case you're wondering who is this in your sitting room or wherever you are under that tree with cyberspace. Can we have the principal, yes, the Dean, School of Economics at Macquarie University, please?
It's very fascinating. It's very timely to the country in terms of discussing the fiscal and monetary policy economic recovery tools. Economic growth is a function of sound macroeconomic management, and that if the macroeconomics is mismanaged, then we are likely to suffer right to the grassroots. Not only, it is a very big effect. And so for us to discuss, fiscal and monetary policy for economic recovery is quite key. As a School of Economics, we are the leading institution in the country and also in Africa in churning out, graduates that are well trained in the field of economics, both on the research angle, but also on the capacity to undertake research. And so, as a School of Economics, we have a high concentration of expertise. Members of academic staff are very well qualified, and they are experts in the different fields of economics. And so they have a lot to offer to the country, a lot of guidance to the policymakers in terms of where should the country go in a crisis like this. But our engagements and our support to government is not only when there is a crisis. A crisis is just a special, a situation or circumstance, but we are operational in and out of crisis, undertaking research and trying to advise government on where to go. At this point in time, allow me to actually thank our partners, the Frederick Ebert, Bank of Uganda, Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, NTV, and then Financial Sector Deepening Uganda for coming together with us to bring this type of debate, to bring this type of engagement that is very, very critical to the country. In a period of crisis like this, you need experts to bring forth this type of advice that can help the country move in a certain good direction. And so I call upon partners to join us, finance the university so that we can do our mandate. We can undertake this expensive venture. You know, there is a very big difference between talking about something in terms of making a debate, but also providing views that are well researched and well grounded. And that process that I'm talking about is quite expensive, and that we need government to support us, but also we need other stakeholders to support us in this engagement.
Thank you very much. That is Professor Barry Edward, the Dean of the School of Economics, one of the sponsors. The other sponsor is in the house. He'll be talking about himself, Bank of Uganda. We really appreciate for making this visible and this a reality. So I will cross over to let my panelists briefly introduce themselves. And these are big people. You don't dare introduce big people because you might just misspell their names. They know the pronunciation. You might know how to read it, but not how to spell it or how to pronounce it. So next to me is Patrick. I'll have Rashmi. I'll have Adam. Patrick.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all viewers and listeners on this program. It's a pleasure to be in this program once again and again in this studio. My name is Patrick Ochailap. I know some pronounce it Ochailap.
You see?
In my language, you don't put a H, but you pronounce as if there's a H. That's why it's Ochailap, Patrick. I am the Deputy Secretary of Treasury in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Privileged to discuss a very topical issue with respect to what we need to do with our economy in the immediate, medium term to long term when we are faced with such a huge shock externally induced by the corona pandemic. I'll start from the macroeconomic aggregates that in spite the existence of this big shock, the macroeconomic aggregates have generally remained stable. Inflation, I think apart from a small jump in the food prices, I think as a result of the reaction to the suppliers of food for the emergency reaction, apart from that food, other items remained low in terms of inflationary pressures. Maybe because the demand remained subdued as a result of the shock, but we shall come to that later.
Yep,
when it comes to the other fiscal macro aggregates, you find that apart from the shock on the revenue side, from the fiscal side, occasioned by a decline in tax collections as a result of a decline in the activity in the economy as a result of the shutdown of the economic activity in response to containing the spread of the pandemic. There was also a notable decline in revenue collection in terms of the taxes from imports. Taxes from income certainly also witnessed a shock, and so did taxes in a number of areas. That being our major source of financing the budget, it is certainly a shock. But we had to do some immediate actions with respect to trying to look for money to try to bridge the revenue supply gap. And that meant that we had to get parliamentary approvals for some external borrowing. We could not borrow domestically because that will again crowd out the private sector in the short to medium term. Secondly, we also had to borrow from the traditional partners, the World Bank and the IMF, in order to give us some headroom in terms of revenues to finance the shortfalls of expenditures this financial year. That equally has gone on well, and we expect that most of those resources will be coming in, and we shall have relatively equal to the projected expenditures this quarter. But still, there were a number of pressures on the expenditure side. That's where there is a certain challenge that we shall be able to discuss again later.
Okay.
With respect to exchange rate, I think Adam here,
Yep.
there was a slight depreciation, but that one was smoothened out by intervention of Bank of Uganda in their traditional monetary policy management. With respect to interest rates in the economy, I think the Bank of Uganda did some intermediate measures to mitigate the adverse effects of this and reduce the CBR. The lending rates have also responded, and the statistics are coming through from Bank of Uganda as well as the private sector indicate that the interest rates came down from, I think, around 19% to now about 17, or coming down to 16%. That then portended a very good indication that the private sector response, although still small, grew to about 14%. So there are quite a number of other fiscal measures that were put in the immediate run to medium term that I'll be able to discuss later after these introductory remarks. Again, the big ticket item with respect to the response certainly is, what do we do? What are the opportunities that we have at this point in time in order to respond immediately to the crisis, but also build a firm foundation for the economy to sustain production, to sustain manufacturing, to sustain import substitution and export promotion. We are aware, or not oblivious of the fact that because of the pandemic, even where we are exporting our goods, demand is expected to be there, but demand equally there has been shocked in an equal measure or even a worse measure than the demand domestically. So in dealing with this, we expect that to the best of our effort and ability, we should be able to invest in these areas that will quickly help us in the immediate run to help the economy stand on its feet, withstand the shock, and then be able to grow with respect to manufacturing for a variety of goods based on our comparative advantage. The other specifics in the short to medium term with respect to the fiscal policy measures, which, as I said, I'll come back again later. So briefly, in a nutshell, these are the building blocks to the stimulus for the economic package that we are putting in place, both fiscal and monetary, as we deal with the pandemic in the short, medium, and long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move on to Rashmi. You'll tell people who you are. What are you seeing where you sit? Is his actions being felt? Will they be felt?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, Fred, and good afternoon, viewers. It's a pleasure to be here with such esteemed panelists. My name is Rashmi Pillai. I'm the Executive Director of Financial Sector Deepening Uganda. We are the leading financial sector think tank and do tank when it comes to financial inclusion and the role of financial sector and financial markets in helping the vulnerable population and small businesses, and how to reduce their vulnerability and help them move upward in the economic growth trajectory. So, as Fred mentioned, I'm going to take the perspective, given our expertise, and the perspective of how has the pandemic impacted people and businesses. What FSD Uganda did, and with the support and partnership of the Bank of Uganda and the Ministry of Finance, is did an analysis on what was the life, what were the resilience levels of people even before COVID. And what we discovered is that there was a significant percentage of the population, about 23%, whose financial lives were already very fragile, meaning that they were earning daily. Their average median savings was around 4,800 Ugandan shillings, which is about $1.50 or less. And their ability to withstand any kind of shock, not even like a pandemic, was very, very little. So our calculations reveal that this amounts to about 3 million people, which is also an estimate, a closer estimate that the Honorable Minister of Finance mentioned in his speech earlier in March, that the Ministry of Finance expects that if the lockdown had continued, that about 2.6 million people would be pushed back into poverty. And that's what our research shows, that anywhere between 2.6 to 3 million people will be pushed back into poverty. And that's what we are looking, and that's what we are seeing. What we then further did is said, all right, so how do we help these segments of the population? We then did an analysis to say, who are these people, where they are, and what we realized is that about 12.5 million of the adults in Uganda, would be in an economic scenario of bounce back, in the sense that they will be able to actually, if the government stimulus packages, or as Mr. Ochailap mentioned, if the stimulus reaches them, then they will be able to reach the same level of pre-COVID financial health that they were in within a year, or maybe a year and change. What we then, the other segment of the population would be 680,000, an estimate of people in manufacturing, small businesses, etc., that would have a longer recovery time because of various factors that we considered, including their own underlying financial health, how quickly they'd be able to get a stimulus support, and other kinds of, where they bank, or so whether they're working with a SACCO or non-deposit taking MFI. And we realized that they may take a little bit longer. It will take them at least a year and a half to get back on their feet in a good case scenario. But the biggest population that would suffer the most is 1.8 million young people, young informal traders, largely women, cross-border trade, or otherwise trading in urban centers. And this segment of the population would actually take more than 2.5 to at most 3 years to recover to a level that they were before the pandemic, a healthcare pandemic that turned into an economic crisis was. And then the question for us became, so now that we know what we know, so what? What can we do? And we are working with the Bank of Uganda, Ministry of Finance to answer, and development partners to answer exactly that question. How do we help the recovery of these very vulnerable segments of the population more quickly? What is our role? And as the President mentioned in the State of the Nation yesterday, we also looked at the various stimulus measures that the Ministry of Finance was looking at. And what we've realized is we need to work with policymakers, the private sector, and development actors to say it is there is the stimulus, but it's also the question of how well that is executed. What can we do to make sure that is efficient, if the good intentions have the greatest reach and the greatest depth? And that's how we're looking at it.
Thank you very much. The aggregate level issues Dr. Adam Mugume would be speaking to, things that people never get to see, but they get to feel. Some of them think they don't exist until they hit them when they see their fuel is going up, and then they ask why is fuel going up. Then you saw the exchange rate. Why can't interest rates come down to zero? Some people asking me, why can't we print money anyway? Are you ready to sign on the notes? Adam Mugume, you have your opening remark.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, viewers. I thank you for the opportunity to be part of the great panelists. And I think this is a timely venture, I mean, to discuss some of these issues with the colleagues from finance and also from financial sector depending. The one thing I think we have learned, or which I agree with Dr. Muhammad, that people never see, is an element of macroeconomic stability. Everybody asks, do we eat macroeconomic stability? Now, when everything is stable, etc., nobody bothers. It is only when things that are out of hand that people start again turning up and say, okay, where have you been? I think one element that has served Uganda well, even in the bad days worse than probably COVID, is that macroeconomic stability is very important as the engine, probably not the engine per se, as a supportive element, the fuel that runs the engine. And I think that's what we have learned. That, for example, if this COVID had come when we are not on a good, strong foundation of macroeconomic stability, we would be in a very bad situation where we are now. Another element I think we are learning is that when we used to do shock analysis, etc., in our analysis, people would think that you're too theoretical, or nobody would ever understand that you're envisioning something like a shock called COVID in another form, and people would think that you are crazy, just thinking that something can hit the economy so adversely to the level of where you have a growth of below 4 or 3% in 1 or 2 months. Nobody Everybody would think that everything, you know, but things, we now know that shocks are part of us. This is COVID, another shock might come. So which means that we have to build resiliency of the economy. And now the building resiliency is both on government side, whether the private sector, whether households. And I think that's what we need to emphasize, that now we have to build resiliency. I like what she has said. In your analysis, you indicated that actually most of our households have illiquid assets. Those even who have assets have illiquid assets. So when you are hit with a shock, you have a land, nobody wants to buy land. You have a house, nobody wants to rent it. So you are there. So which means that, yes, we have to build the buffers, we have to strengthen financial sector development. So basically, that's where we are now. I like what the president started on yesterday, that Uganda is a blessed country. We have everything. Or the question is, what do you do with everything? We have our neighbors who want beans, who want maize. We have the potential to supply the beans and the maize. That's where we are now. I mean, whether you have a lockdown, etc., people in the neighboring countries will need maize. So what is the strategy to supply those beans? And I think going forward, those are the things that we should be talking about. So if we know that we have that advantage of supplying beans or maize, it could be, in our local language, they say that God who gave you is the one who denied me. So you may find that the God who gave us these blessings could be the one who denied some other neighboring countries' blessings. So we're able to supply them for now. So we have our neighboring countries that require even smaller manufactured products we are producing. It can be plastics, it can be iron bars. So we should be able to say, okay, how do we take these opportunities? Quickly go into the market. And to me, I always talk about more export promotion rather than per se import substitution. I want to, why do I say so? Export promotion will help me to bridge my balance of payment, which I have a problem with. If I had this buffers in balance of payment, I wouldn't be worried, because I know dollars will be coming in, whether you want it or not. People in the neighboring countries, whether there is COVID, whether there is Ebola, people will still need beans, people will still need maize, people will still need medicine, people will still need even those who can be able to cement and iron bars, and even, by the way, the drunkards who wanted the Ugandan beer will still be there even under COVID, even with Ebola. So those are the things I think opportunities should be talking about.
Thank you very much. Those are introductory remarks of where each one of them sit and what they have been watching, what they have been seeing. We also know you've been out there seeing things, actually experiencing things. You have possibly now tasted a lot more posho than you thought you would ever do. Oh, you have rediscovered that posho is also food, and you can actually eat it for a month and be alive. Some people used to think, if I ever ate posho for a day, I will die. Well, this is where we are. What is this economy about? How do we do? And the things that we never get to see, the parameters that we do not interact with, the exchange rate out there, the conversation that we always have, where do we sell our food? Is our food going anywhere? But also, most importantly, parameter number 5 that the president mentioned, building an integrated, self-sustaining economy. These are things sometimes we don't get to see. I really was reading through the president's mentioning of what comes out of coffee or fish exports, and I remembered our scientists in National Agricultural Research Organization. Cassava mosaic was wiping out our cassava. Banana bacteria wilt was wiping out our bananas. Our maize was being wiped out. These gentlemen and ladies sat behind their laboratories and wiped out the thing. Now we can talk about something to export. So it's really an integrated economy. You can, and this is why I want to come back to Patrick. How are you financing the things we may not see? This budget needs to go to the scientists, needs to go to the researchers, needs to go to the teachers, needs to go to where? How are you balancing that with the revenues falling, as you mentioned? You really must be holding a very hot potato. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, for that highlight. Indeed, the issue about the import substitution and export promotion starts with improving the productivity and production of the agricultural sector, where we all agree Uganda has got a very tremendous comparative advantage. And actually the President mentioned it very clearly yesterday. What we now need to do, which seems to, we have been doing it, but I think we now need to enhance those links, because a lesson learned now from this pandemic is to see to it that we link the research in agriculture, whether in crops, animals, fisheries, forestry, etc. We need to link it with the extension or delivery channels to evacuate that technology into the farmers. We have the largest, best placed researchers in fisheries, for example. If you go to, is it Namlonge, this institution here on Bombo Road,
Yeah.
that
Kawanda
research
is-
institution, I went there once, and the kind of fish aquaculture that they have, which can promote the fish cage farming in our lakes, rivers, swamps, and so on, is quite amazing. They even have a dosage of how that fish is supposed to be fed, with the kind of ingredients that are supposed to be consumed, and so on and so forth.
And I heard the
Those-
president say we must leave the wetlands for fishing,
Yes,
so we must get that knowledge.
that is
Into
a
those ponds.
Yes, that's a resource which is available. That's a resource which the policy makers have already guided can be used only for fish. And if you look at the lakes, the fishery bodies, the swamps, and so on, where this fish can be grown, is quite amazing and tremendous. And each pond, using that technology, evacuated properly from the research institution that I'm talking about, you'll find the type of fish, and the output of those ponds will be tremendous, both for household incomes, household nutrition, and I know nutrition is one of the ingredients in human life. Yeah, I think between
Especially
the age of
fighting against
zero to
COVID, we
five.
need healthy people.
Yes, COVID needs healthy people. If you are healthy, then you can withstand COVID better. And I think fish is one of those that gives us a very good ingredient in terms of the potential omega 5, omega what, all those creams are there,
Omega
whatever
3,
are there.
yeah.
So you can see from fish alone the kind of technologies that can be evacuated from that institution, using appropriate extension work, using appropriate channels of distribution. You can even use operation wealth creation to pick those varieties now to deliver into well-prepared fish ponds across the country. And you can also organize then the youth, the women, and the rest of the population to produce around the fish. You can now go ahead and do a further research to find out how many people you can employ and earn income out of that crop or that item called fish. And the kind of ingredients that you are getting from fish, the byproducts, the fish gall, the omega oils, the ornamentals, and the beautification instruments and whatever that you get from fish, that's one line.
So we'll
You
be
need-
getting back to you later
Yes.
on to speak to what will it take for this to happen, because the technologies have
Yes,
been there.
yes.
It looks like you have to do some things.
Yeah,
We
you need
hope-
to add 4 things. One, you certainly need to add resources for human resources in science, the research. You need to hire those scientists for research in that area. And not only fish. When I mention fish, I
Just
think
an
it goes on
example.
for everything else.
Yes.
Agriculture, cows, and so on and so forth. Then you need to put on the extension workers. These people who are trained to transmit that technology from that point into the organized group. The third point, actually, which comes before even extension workers also or concurrently, is how to organize people to produce. Because as it is now, the households are on their own. They are, okay, some of them are in circles, some of them are in farmer groups, particularly those on the oilseed industry. Those ones are outgrowers. On sugarcane, I think also is outgrower. Perhaps it's time for us now to think quickly and actually implement it, that we need to organize the farmers into adaptation of these technologies so that we evacuate technology into an organized group, meaningfully employ people there in order to earn income, to improve their household incomes in the first instance, get the food nutrients, the excess of which they put in the market,
Okay.
and the market becomes another source of income for the country first and foremost, and also for you, the household farmer, and also the circles, organized groups. And that then integrates with the financial system in the country. With the circles now saving with these production units, you should then be able to multiply the investments in that area for the benefit of those people, but also growing the economy sustainably. That truly makes the economy well integrated, self-sustaining, and able to withstand shocks, whether COVID or not, first of all internally. In fact, with this COVID thing, pandemic, you see clearly that with the little efforts, however organized they were, we were able to kind of go through it in terms of food. You can't imagine a situation if COVID hit us at a time when our reserves are that small in the central bank.
And the stocks of food also.
The stock of food is not there.
Yeah.
The number of people who are vulnerable becomes more. It would have been a terrible situation for us. But thank God, even with the disorganized or disjointed arrangements which are there, we're able to withstand it. People were able to eat. The larger part of the country was actually eating their own food. The larger part of the country is still producing. And I want to thank them and encourage them that actually, whenever I meet any member of parliament from my area, I tell people to produce. Let them plant maize, let them plant beans, let them plant anything. Put it in the soil. Because whether COVID is there or not, or soon after it, you'll find that there is a big vacuum in terms of food. And we need also to link up that production, especially of food, because of agriculture, with technologies for irrigation, for example. Because we are happy we have rain now. It's very good, thank God for that.
Yeah.
But if a drought again hits, again it feeds into our statistics very quickly, that inflation hits up. The food inflation is very, very sensitive to climate changes. So we need those off-grid areas to adapt green-friendly technologies of solar-powered equipment for pumping water from the various water resources. For irrigation, again, the organization of farmers is extremely important for a start. You could have a parish, organize people, demonstrate that during a time of drought, we should be able to pump water now using solar power. You turn that disadvantage of heat from the sun into a big advantage of a source of energy to get water from the ground and irrigate the area. And some examples have been done in areas like Amuria and other places. We have done an experiment with Ministry of Water. There are now about 60 mini irrigation schemes. And clearly you demonstrate, you clearly see that those women who are there, those children, the youth who are there, are not bothered about gambling training centers. No. They have cabbages throughout the year. They have onions. They have tomatoes. That is the kind of thing that will truly link the incentives that we are putting in place with the necessary production activity in the countryside, with the necessary sustainable employment for both youth and women at grassroots level, for both income generation for themselves, incomes for the GDP of this economy, and income for the government itself in terms of organized groups now coming to the tax bracket. Another lesson which we learn, I think Madam talked about the informal sector. The lesson from COVID is that it's necessary for us to formalize now the informal sector. For example, we quickly saw in urban centers where people are living hand to mouth, particularly in Kampala and the neighborhoods. Those who are picking money hand to mouth quickly became vulnerable. Why? Because that was their way of life and they thought it was a norm. But this is now the time for us to organize them, taking advantage of this, that you people, in order not to fall into that kind of thing again, should it ever come, I don't want it to come anyway. Organize people like border borders now in a better way. Maybe the big people who own them and employ these young people should now organize those people that as you bring my portion for the day, make sure that out of your portion which I'm going to give you, say it's 10,000, you form a circle where you put in 3,000 shillings out of 10,000 that you're getting per day as savings for a rainy day. And those savings become a nucleus for a big fund which they can now invest using investment clubs. We have already put in place investment clubs. So that those investment clubs earn them interest over a period of time for the time the money is staying there.
And of course,
so
that also speaks to diversification.
Yes.
of their livelihoods.
And it also speaks to diversification of their livelihood.
Yep.
You say you take 7,000 to your family, buy this and that for the needs for the day. Have a saving there. In a year, if it's 3,000 per month per day, times 30, that's 90,000. In a year, I don't know what it is. And then if it's a pool of money which is invested by investment clubs, now linking with the financial sector, deepening, you'll find that using your applications in mobile phones, etc., they are investing that money. Their interest comes in. They know the balances, etc.
I think now you've
So
really,
that you don't become vulnerable the following day. A shock comes to your pocket.
you've really spoken to the space of Rashmi, savings on the platforms. What have you been seeing during COVID? Are we speaking to the 1.8 million people? What were they kind of doing? The ones who would lag on for a longer time. These are policies, because this is fiscal policy really, putting money in different places with an intention. Are the intentions being seen down there, or is there something? What did you see down there? Then we can interrogate the gaps, if any.
Okay, Mr. Wachalap spoke to several dimensions, so
Yes.
I will try to do justice to everything he covered. So Dr. Mumuza, so let's begin with what Mr. Wachalap said. So I agree with him that we need to relook at the structure of our economy and how to build long-term resilience. If it will be a wasted opportunity if we did not learn from this. So that's a given. But then we also need to examine a couple of things. One thing that I disagree with Mr. Wachalap is that, yes, we have to build medium and long-term solutions, no question about it. But there is a segment of population who's bleeding right now. And we have to fix the bleeding before we then help you heal for the long term. So that needs to be discussed right now. So it is. So, and some of that work is being done by the Ministry of Finance, Bank of Uganda, and even development partners, right? So we heard the other day USAID doing $10 million of like unconditional cash transfers. So people who are completely under the poverty trap, you first need to get out of that trap before you can be helped. So now coming back to the question you asked on what are we seeing on the ground, what we are seeing is there are bulk of the population, however you segment it, actually do not do a lot of financial business with tier 1 to 3 financial institutions, with supervised financial institutions. They actually do it with non-deposit taking microfinance institutions, SACCOs, VSLAs. Now, when they form these groups and you shut down the informal sector, because you see, when you mention bodas, they are not just the passenger economy, they're also the entire logistics economy. Because you're moving goods and services, and a lot of the matatus, bodas are actually helping these small businesses. They form that feeder from your farm to the main road. So when suddenly that gets locked down, everybody gets impacted because they are enabling the movement of that. Then what happened is that you were not able to move your goods that you had. You were drawing down on whatever liquidity you had. You would then at some point realize you cannot pay back the loan. You could have, but you don't know if the situation is getting worse. So you're holding on to that liquidity. That means you're not paying that non-deposit taking MFI, you're not paying that SACCO. They did what any business would do. Most MFIs furloughed their staff or laid them off because you don't have cash flow to pay their salaries. For some good MFIs, the repayment rates from 90 or 85% that we were watching went to 30, 35, 38%. So they're now facing an existential threat. So the point I agree with what Mr. Wachalap said, but I think there needs to be a discussion on, we have to stop the bleeding. How do we do it? It is not within the domain of the formal financial structures that we understand. That does not excuse us from figuring out innovative solutions. So,
yeah, I agree that yes, there is something that indeed the government is doing something immediately. We're not stepping back and say that let's talk about the long term, medium term. No, we did immediately. For example, the immediate fiscal adjustment that the government did was realizing that COVID has come. The guys who are always in the aeroplane, of course, definitely that became a source of the provisions. Of course, the revenues were coming down, so you have to look for money. But the provision became available for us now to channel that money to deal with the immediate effects of food relief provision, which is still going on. You had the president say so. And that will continue for as long as it's necessary. Then two, we also had to use the provisions of no more conferences, no more travel inland, no more expenditures on large expenditures on fuel, for example, on a part of government. I'm talking about government, not private sector, because that also hits me in the other side, because I'll not be getting revenue from the fuel consumption.
Yes, of course.
So
this is the integration we're talking
This
about.
is the integration we're
You
talking
can't
about.
eat your cake and
So,
have it.
we are doing something even in
Yes.
the ground to forestall the bleeding that's happening now. And that has not stopped the other programs, such as SAGE, the social assistance grants to the elderly. That's going to continue. Actually, to the contrary, from the stimulus package, is going to be enhanced. It is going to be rolled out to the policy level that government has mentioned. And then we are going to continue with the women and the youth groups money. It's going to continue. That money is part of the budgetary resources. So actually, the continuation of the immediate actions were a result of the fiscal adjustment that we had to take as a result of the external shock. And that's going on. And that worked perfectly well. And that's why we got to the 300 and something billion that was given to health and also institutions which helped health to acquire what they are acquiring, to recruit more staff, and so on and so forth. So that must continue. But in the immediate term beginning next financial year, which is beginning next month, it's necessary to increase the capacity of scientists to do research, particularly in the agricultural sector, to develop technologies, fertilizers, agronomy, agriculture practices, animal husbandry practices, which deliver the traceability of the products that are manufactured, because we are going to delve into the external market. I don't agree with Adam when he says it doesn't emphasize import substitution. Though. Yes, export promotion and import substitution must go hand in hand. Because if you listen to the president, he mentioned we are now importing items which actually we could actually manufacture here, worth about $3.6 billion out of the $7 billion that we are of imports that we are importing. Fats, animal fats, the cooking oil, the vegetable fats, the meat, beef,
we will certainly be speaking
and so on and so
into
forth. So it becomes, you can clearly see that in that area, we definitely need import substitution. And besides that, once you satisfy the import substitution, the demand locally, import substitution for the demand of those things domestically. And then export promotion is the demand of external market for our products, which will earn us foreign exchange. So the two must go hand in hand.
He deals with the balance of payments, so he'll be coming in to speak because it's both.
Yes,
it incorporates
it's
both of those.
Yeah.
As he's looking for the other, and he's looking for this one.
Yes.
But right now, I want to bring in another private sector panelist. You saw him on our advert, Patrick Vitature. I couldn't have two Patricks in the house, and but also there is social distancing. But also, we want him to speak from his private sector perspective wherever he is. He's going to give us his insights. He's always quite handy in giving us practical realities that we need, and then thereafter. Dr. Adam Mugume will come in and speak from the central bank point of view on what he's saying. Patrick, waiting for your wisdom and experience.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. It's
no
a pleasure
lockdown,
to join you.
No lockdown, I'm coming for my coffee.
It's been an interesting period for us to reflect.
Yes.
And I'm honored to be amongst this panel. I want to thank you all for giving me a chance to share my views. I will stick to the area which affects me most or closest to my heart. When you look at the pyramid or the hierarchy of the structure that we have of our demography, we have the bigger business at the top, and in the middle you have the SMEs, and at the bottom you'll have the rest of the public, which I would call the wananchi, and sometimes they go right to the bottom of the pyramid. You could call those the bottom of the pyramid, whether they are farmers, small people trying to do business. We need to look out for these people. What has happened in the last 4 months is a disruption of some kind. And we use the word disruption quite loosely or notionally in many times. But this time we have had a real disruption, a true disruption. This thing called coronavirus or COVID-19. It has come with such impact that it's going to touch everybody's life. And it causes us to think what we are doing, where we are coming from and where we are going. I'd like to begin by thanking our government, the government of Uganda. They've done an exceptional job. led by, of course, His Excellency the President, who chose to first protect lives at the expense of livelihood. And now he's talking about the economy, how to revive the economy, how to keep it going. It's a balancing act, but he chose to save lives first, and you must give him credit for that. He's very upbeat, he's been very optimistic, and he's giving us hope. After all, he is the fountain of honor. He's now the source of hope. This man is experienced, and he has drawn on his wisdom to guide us. I must also thank Bank of Uganda for some of the measures they have taken. They have helped the business community. First of all, by all the banks, commercial banks, trying to reach out to their customers and become more flexible, the terms with which we are working with, because very many people have got financing of some kind from one bank or the other. And also today, I think the LTV, loan to value, has been revised upwards so that people can help protect the property industry, because the property industry was at risk. When nobody has money and people start selling, if everybody sells at the same time, the economy can easily crash because of the property, the real estate side. So the period we are going into is a period of survival, whereby survival is winning. Anybody who survives during this time for the next 12 months will win. We are not going to be in for a sprint. This is really a marathon. We need to keep running. We've got to stay resilient. We've got to have fortitude. We've got to have courage and keep fighting, because it's not going to be easy in the next 12 months. Even those businesses that are established, especially those that are capital heavy, resource heavy, they've got to adjust. Those who have been working with that analog model, they've got to adjust the way they do business. We've got to go digital. You've got to embrace the changes. There are many startups that are struggling, and their biggest problem is cash flow, because now, more than any other time, cash flow is king. You have to look after the little money you have and keep an eye on your costs to make sure your costs are as low as possible. Especially SMEs, which is the area I really want to target. You've got to look after cash flows and brace yourself. The government will put together packages, and this stimulus package they have presented, my namesake Patrick Ochailap has so elaborately explained, is fantastic at a macro level. What we need is to give advice to our small businesses so that they can survive the next 12 months, because it's going to be a very hard and trying 12 months, because people just don't have the easy money to spend that they had in the past. We've got to brace ourselves and see that we can turn around the situation as quickly as possible. And that means you must have an acute awareness of the things, the instruments, the stimulus that will transform your businesses, your work habits, the way you function, and how we can survive and thrive in the coming days. How do we do this? Key first, number one, I must emphasize, is cash. Cash is everything. You must look after your cash flow. Then when opportunity comes, you can respond, because the landscape has changed. I take you a step back at a global level. What has happened in the last 4 months? The 600 richest people in the world have become so much richer in the last 4 months. They have collectively earned about $650 billion more for themselves. And this is just 1%, less than the 1% of the world's richest people. So the gap between the poor and the rich is just getting wider at a global level. If that happens too in our economies at a national level, which eventually does happen, because whenever there's a landscape change, these things happen, they have huge socio-economic challenges or consequences. And so we've got to try and mitigate this so that the poor don't become poorer. Those who are marginal and just beginning their businesses don't slide backwards, which is very easy. When I talk of a land change, something that has changed, the ground has moved on you. At a global level, World War I was one such incident. World War II was another incident where everything changed and a new set of millionaires is created. Bring it down to Uganda's context. In 1972, when Amin expelled the Asians, it was a groundbreaking event economically. It transformed the landscape. There were new opportunities for some people and others missed out. 1979, when Amin was deposed, again there was a landscape change. 1986, when NRM came to power, there was a landscape change. So these changes create a crisis of some kind for some people, but also present opportunity. The recent global crisis of 2008 was a global change. It impacted many of us here. That was the time people talked about the bailout. What the government is doing today with the economic stimulus is similar to a bailout. I don't like the word bailout because it's a responsibility of the government to make sure its economy is stable. So they have to make certain interventions. Today, in 2020, COVID is the big disruption. It's been very disruptive. The question is, how do we safeguard these businesses? I've emphasized the need for cash flow. And the biggest challenge is access to credit in our environment. It's traditionally been the problem. The government has addressed many of the other things like infrastructure, electricity, and creating a peaceful environment with security. They've done wonderfully well in the last few years. But cash flow, access to credit has been a big problem. I think that is the reason why the president, in his wisdom, has chosen this time to put 1 trillion shillings in a small bank, Uganda Development Bank. Why did he focus on UDB? Yet we have almost 30 other commercial banks. We want the liquidity. There might be a bottleneck there, everybody rushing to UDB. He put 100 billion, I think, in UDC, and probably 50 billion in microfinance, which is important to go to the grassroots to help the people there. But the big challenge is UDB, 1 trillion. That is a ground-moving change. It has changed the landscape. The main reason is because of the cost of money. If people can borrow money at a rate of 10 to 12%, they probably stand a much better chance to make their businesses remain viable. The big problem with the commercial banks was the rates were always so much higher. When people borrow money at 25% and have to pay it back, or from a microfinance at 5% per month and have to pay it back, they will struggle. So what the president is trying to do, I think in his wisdom, is to change that, to make an intervention. Either the commercial banks will bring their rates down, or those other players will come into the market and they see that it actually makes sense to find a way to bring that rate down because the environment has changed. We cannot justify those high interest rates, especially for the SMEs. And this is where most jobs are created, because our biggest problem in Uganda probably is the fast-growing population and lack of opportunity for these people. So we've got to find a way to create jobs for them, to give them a chance, to give them an opportunity. They have got their talents, they're hardworking, and a big number of them are honest people. They need a bit of sensitizing on business ethics, but they understand the opportunity. And because our population is growing so big, so fast, they create the market, but they need the spending power. And if we keep the interest rates extremely high, especially in the commercial banks, we will not have done much. So I think that's where the biggest intervention is going to come from. Changing the interest rates, making access to credit something that is acceptable. I hope one day we can be talking single-digit interest rates across the board for every Ugandan who wants access to finance. Over to you, Doctor.
Oh, thanks, Patrick. That's quite candid, very, very passionate about what he's talking about. And he hasn't only talked about the top of the pyramid where he sits. He's so much concerned with the bottom of the pyramid, which holds the top. If those SMEs are not there, if the fish farmers are not there, who would buy your beer? Certainly, because that's where it ends up. This is the integrated self-sustaining economy that's not set up that factory in Namamve. If I don't buy that iron sheet, then the factory is going to close. So how do I make sure the people down there continuously are reviving? And he's spoken to cash, which is critical. I think this is what Rashmi was talking about. Adam, people seem to be saying interest rates are just up there. Are they just up there, or what do we do? Do I need to climb the ladder to get them down, or cut the tree? What exactly should we be doing?
No, let me address two issues about interest rate and also what we started with, where we were on import and export substitution. I agree with Ochaira that both of them can go concurrently. Now, when I was talking about, say, maize, you grow maize, you eat some, but your neighbor Kenya wants more maize than even probably what you need to eat from here. So why not produce and export to it? As you gear up your production, knowing that, Ugandans like more matoke than posho, apart from schools, and therefore I can supply the Kenyan market. And that's really what I'm talking about. I mean, it is a question of saying, okay, I'm more driven to look at how I can produce and export, and also consume part of what I have produced. I can quote milk, for example. We are talking about milk exports. I remember in 1990s, most of us were drinking milk from Kenya. Early 1990s. Apart from people who would get milk from these guys who drive with cars from Nakasonga, etc., and we go and pick from
to come on jerrycans.
On jerrycans.
Yes.
But most of us, the so-called people middle income, we are looking at Kenyan milk. But now we are able to export milk to Kenya. So those are the big steps. Remember, even bread, by the way, you would go to Tororo or Busia and see Kenyan bread, you come with it, was like, you know, it was really those days, heaven. Okay? But now, you are exporting bread to South Sudan. You're exporting bread to DRC. And to some the other day, you are exporting bread even to Rwanda. So those are the things that we have seen in our lifetime. And we are really grateful. We have seen changes that have happened in the Ugandan context. There is no doubt about that. But think about it. Most of us who have ever kept cows, you produce milk, sometimes you look for where to sell it in those days, and we just pour it. Either you give it to dogs, or you churn it into ghee. If you have excess during whatever, you pour it. But now you go to any village and see who can pour milk. Nobody. They know there is a milk cooling plant somewhere, okay? And some of that milk is the one we're turning into powder, and we're exporting. And those are the things we're talking about. That is the integration. So, but now we are moving away from milk production basically to substitute with Kenyan milk. We are talking about milk production for exporting. So those are the aspects we are talking about. Many people now in the rural areas, they are moving away from the traditional cows. They are looking for either cows for beef or cows for milk production.
That's correct.
So those are the changes we have seen, simply because the mindset is now changing, knowing that yes, once I export, I get more money. And another fundamental thing we have is we record is that a farm that exports is larger, pays better wages. Okay, and employs more people.
That's correct.
There is no doubt about that. That's evident. So that's really the angle we are talking about. There is one fundamental issue that I need to highlight. The import and export gap. Currently, we are talking about $2.something billion. We are like 12 months to April. We imported goods worth 6.4 billion, and we exported goods worth 3.8 billion. So that's the gap. Now, at the balance of payment side, we are saying, okay, how do we close this? Remember that travel is no longer there. The tourism is no longer there. FDI
is not there.
Is
it's
not
in
there.
reverse, actually.
Is the reverse now.
It's in reverse.
Okay? Workers' remittance is no longer there. Actually, in the month of April, like what we saw, travel was zero, tourism, workers' remittances was down by 80% in the month of April compared to the previous months. You're already seeing that now, how do I finance the 2.something billion deficit in terms of goods? And China, on the other hand, is giving me a projection that he wants money to service loans he contracted many years ago. And then
It's a constant. That's a constant.
that's a constant.
It's a growing
Now, that's why I'm saying,
variable.
now for Ugandan economy as a whole integrated, we are saying, okay, now we need more exports, more milk producers who can export, more maize producers who can supply the schools and us, but also do exporting. That's the angle we are coming from.
Okay.
So I think we'll be getting into that, and you're going to speak to interest rates, because before you can export, these guys will need to be borrowing cheaply. Just
Interest
hold your
rate.
breath. You'll get to it. Want to run an advert. So just have a break so that you can drink some water. You see some glasses around.
Mine is empty.
But as you plan for that intervention, the exporters need affordable credit.
Yes.
We'll be get back to you and to speak about you who export, you who do import replacement. Where do you get the money from? What is the problem with your lender? Are they just being naughty? We're going to come back. Welcome back. You're still watching National Media Forum. We're having a debate on fiscal and monetary policies for economic recovery, not just recovery, but to sustain the growth. This economy, we said, we have had a shock. We're projected to grow the economy in 2019-20 at 6%. That figure came down by the Ministry of Finance to 3.9. IMF has said it might be 3.3. We don't know where it will end up, because it can be anywhere. But what is very clear is the economy is going down. How do we stop it from going down? How do we rebuild it? And we don't want the economy to go without you. So this conversation is also about you. And one of the things that really affects you as an entity are interest rates. Because for many of us, to finance our businesses, we need to borrow. From whichever sources that we do, we borrow. Even those who do not borrow, you are affected by possibly those who borrow and eventually fail to pay their money. And they run to you as a relative to say, hey man, they're selling my house, they're selling my bicycle, come and help. Why are interest rates where they are? The man who watches them, I don't want to say who sets them, is in the house. He watches them with interest once in a while. Maybe he has ability to influence, I don't know. But since he's in the house, he will speak for himself. Dr. Adam Mugume, you do research and policy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Interest rate has been a monster in Uganda that has taken us long really to bring it down. And why the interest rate don't come down is a combination of many factors. Some of them are structural. If you go to borrow, for example, what do you mortgage as a collateral? It is either land or a building. And you know the land wrangles in Uganda. By the time you go to Minister of Lands to prove that the land collateral is genuine, it will take you a while. And even that one doesn't give you a guarantee that actually you are still safe as a commercial bank. So what does a commercial bank do? They put that risk as part of the interest. Okay, so there are some of these structural issues. So if I'm really, I remember that by the way that the commercial bank is lending money from somebody else, is an intermediary. It gets money from a child who is very rich and gives to poor Adam and receive it. So the commercial bank is just in between, intermediating between me and the child who has the surplus. So you have to know that when a commercial bank is lending money, it belongs to someone. It is not their money. It is belongs to another private entity. So if they are going to give me the money, they have to price my risk. I have given them as a collateral land, which land has a problem. So that's one issue. But also another factor is that there is a big brother in the room called Fiscal. He borrows at 15%. So if me, I'm going to, as Minister of Finance, now not as long as the lender. So if he's borrowing at 15 or 16%, and me as Adam, who can die any time, remember government lives forever.
It never dies, yes.
It never dies. So if you can borrow 15, 16, me as Adam who is going to not be there tomorrow.
Or even to disappear, you don't die, but you just disappear.
Yeah, disappear. What does that mean? The aggregate is free rate, 16%, and add on the premium of the fact that I'm likely to not be there tomorrow. It goes into 20%. So those are some of the aspects. Another aspect is we have 26 banks. But economies of scale means that they are only looking at very few people in Kampala. So they haven't spread out. That's where I put the blame again on our side, including me, on the financial sector. What have we done to deepen the financial sector beyond the urban centers? Bank of Uganda there, I think we have a blame also equally. So the more you do in terms of outreach, economies of scale, the more you bring in many people into the banking system. Therefore, the cost of operation in terms of the bank operation, etc., will start decreasing because of economies of scale. So those are some of the aspects. And we are trying to address some of these. Financial sector deepening and inclusion is a factor that we should not put on the side. Okay? Because we had already said earlier on that people who have no liquid assets, which is cash, also Mr. Bitaturi has mentioned it. So if you have had your cash substitute as goat or a cow, and nobody is buying your goat or cow, what will you do? So, but if you had a financial liquid asset in a financial system that is secure, that is safe, then you are able to draw some of those. So financial sector development and deepening becomes really very fundamental. You noted that although we have some, I praise ourselves for having macroeconomic stability for how many years, 30 years plus.
Yeah.
Where we score poorly in even under low-income countries in the global world is financial sector development in the case of Uganda.
So what are they going to do?
It is something that we have not really looked at because, and financial sector depend whether you look at private sector credit as a ratio of GDP, whether you look at interest margins, whether you look at financial inclusion. Apart from recently when you had mobile money operations, you see that as the case of Uganda, really we have scored part. Simply because someone may think that financial sector is just a service, but it goes back into the real economy, what the president was talking about. It is facilitates the real economy. So, and I think that's one of the things we are running from now. What we have to put emphasis on is on financial sector development and depending. However, on the positive side, as the Bank of Uganda, we have tried to ease monetary policy. Remember, as in gradually we have reduced CBR. Have commercial banks responded? Yeah, to a great extent. There are some that actually are charging interest rate equivalent to what UDB is giving. Remember that for them, they are mobilizing deposits, they are intermediating, they are getting money, but are still lending below even 10%. There are some commercial banks. So the weighted, when we talk about the weight, there are those who borrow at 22%, but also there are those who borrow below 10%.
The less risky.
The less risky.
Yes.
Okay?
It will be interesting to know those ones.
Yes, I was going to say, who are these people?
You look for those who are not risky.
So that the policy direction is targeted towards.
For example, if you look at a commercial bank that deals with micro lenders, or they will have higher lending interest rates, and those micro borrowers who are dealing with a commercial bank that is doing macro lending has specialized. You know, the banking system specializes. There are those who deal with small scale enterprises. There are those who deal with micro borrowers, and those ones would be charging high interest rate. But those who deal with corporate, a corporate is able to negotiate, is able to understand, is able to hire lawyers who will go through the legal documents. And if you go to a bank that deals with those, you'll find that actually their interest rate doesn't exceed 12%.
So it's about the risking.
It is about the risk.
Yeah.
No, we always have interest rate per sector, per bank, and per sector.
And per sector, yes.
Okay? So every month we have, I don't want to disclose the...
Of course not.
Okay? But me, from my angle, I know banks that basically because of the nature of their clients, their interest rates have never exceeded 15, even if you look in the history. There are those who deal with smaller borrowers. The interest rate, whether they do what, they will never go below 20. So that is what we see.
So the market is...
Can you disclose a sector, not a person?
Yeah, we can...
Which is borrowing
as it talks about the corporates,
yes.
We possibly would know who the corporates are.
Yeah, because they are few.
They are few. They are certainly not me and you.
Yeah.
But I think this is...
agriculture part of the equation?
Agriculture, if you remove...
Commercial farmers, I mean.
If we remove agriculture, if you remove from SCF, and look at the other sector, it is charged the highest interest rate.
Yes.
Because it is risky.
Yes.
Yeah.
They will talk about, if you exclude SCF, you are talking about they'll always be borrowing in 24-25%.
Yes.
Which is a really big problem. But the question is, you are talking about a commercial bank that has also borrowed money from another person, a saver.
Yeah, exactly.
And once he makes a loss,
the other person cannot make a loss.
he has to put on the money.
Yeah.
But overall, what I was emphasizing is that, yes, we have reduced the CBR. We know that the weighted overall industry average has moved from 19 to around 17 now, which is, which is a step. That they have the weighted interest rates now, weighted for the entire industry as of April, was standing around 17%. Okay. In Feb, it was around 19%. So it automatically means that we should also accept that, yes, I'm not saying that 17 is good enough. No,
of course.
17% means that your rate of return must be above 17. There is no rate of return above 17 as whatever. So the question is, 17% even is still too high. I agree with Patrick. How can we reduce it up to
single digit?
The single digit.
I think viewers, you now can see the integration between fiscal and monetary policy, because one of the key things he has mentioned is when fiscal policy needs money, they walk into the market at 15%. Now that already affects the monetary policy side.
Yes.
The small scale borrower is literally edged out of the market because they can't have that return of 19% where they are. And at this point, I want to bring back Patrick Bitature to come and speak on the side of SMEs. What is the situation there? And then Rashmi, who has means of, you know, reaching out economies of scale at a cost also may not help you. Rashmi seems to have found a way of how do we scale out without raising the costs. So we want to get back to Patrick Bitature to give us something about the SMEs.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. First of all, I must emphasize that today my message is about interest rate for the SMEs and for the Muntu-Awansi, the ordinary people. Even the salaried people, they get loans from institutions at a very high interest rate, and it's very hard to justify. I think this COVID period is a time for us to press the reset button, where everything can be, you rethink it, reimagine it. It's not fair that a person I respect so much, Dr. Adam there, to say that the bank structure is designed such that certain people pay certain interest rates. I don't know of a Ugandan who borrows in Ugandan shillings in at a single digit rate. Our rates are always way above. When we borrow in dollars, you can get 7%, 8%, 9%, but that's pegged to the dollar. And it defeats me to think that people even who have a mortgage can borrow at 17% to pay for a house, which means in every 6 years you are buying a new house for the bank. You cannot take mortgages at those rates. So I think we've got to rethink this interest rate. We've got to rethink jobs. We have to create jobs for these young people. 75% of the population are considered youth in Uganda, and the average age is 16.6. These are very young. So all these good macroeconomic level policies we put out there and stimuli that we advise the government to provide, they are wonderful things at a macro level. But we must come and listen to the ordinary person, especially the young people. And again, I want to emphasize women, young women. We need to put a special program for them for funding to encourage them to get into business. Gender-based violence will not go away when they are so suppressed. Property rights, we've got to empower the young women so that the next generation of daughters does not go through their daughters what our peers, our sisters have gone through. It's just been unfair. The marriage and divorce bill that has failed to go through, they call it MAD or MAD bill for a reason. All these things come around the social well-being of people and to find some kind of equilibrium. But I would like to end by giving advice to many of the SMEs that are struggling today, because their challenges are the challenges I know, I feel. I may be a little bit bigger in business, but I know exactly what they are going through. And they've got to rethink their strategies, especially in the coming months. Businesses, especially the small businesses, must base your planning on realities, not on aspirations. All too often, our aspirations drive us. We must shift our financing focus to be from most likely to worst case scenario. Whenever you're planning your scenarios, plan for the worst so that anything that comes above that is a bonus. That would be so much better. But if we continue the way we were planning in the past, we're going to struggle. We must find every way possible to reduce our expenses. And in that area, we should not leave any stone unturned. Cut the costs as much as possible, especially in the coming 12 months. This is the little runway we have so that business can go back to normal. We need to streamline and automate as many of our work processes as possible so that we can go to scale efficiently and effectively. Those who have not embraced digital transformation should start doing so now to be digitally relevant and to remain competitive. While people are our biggest assets, and here I talk about it very carefully because many companies say people are our biggest assets, but cost cutting and layoffs are potentially your biggest and quickest savings. So when you have to cut people, you've got to lay off people. You must cut once and cut deep. But always be human, be a decent human being, and find a way to do it in a manner that is acceptable so that you don't leave deep scars and the healing can happen. Encourage people, support people so they can retool, reinvent themselves, reskill, and move on. Because it's inevitable. These things happen all over the world. People are laying off. And that will have to happen here too. When that happens, do it with a human face. You must be open and transparent in your communications, especially when you're communicating bad news. Tell people the truth, and they'll understand. Protect your staff, and let them know that you are caring for them. And if you can't care for all of them, find a way to distribute the little you have to make sure you look after your people. To get effective leadership, management must understand change and work with the owners to make sure that this change happens quickly and smoothly. It will be a bit painful, but like any operation, when you go to a doctor, you try to do it with precision and have minimum damage. But it is important that we do so that the company can survive and we keep moving forward. We need conviction, we need resilience, we need fortitude. Fortitude, I mean courage during these adverse times. You must believe in what you're doing. Now, when I look at an industry that the president called the leisure industry or pleasure industry, that's where tourism lies. More than 200, maybe 300,000 people's jobs are in that sector. We can't just dismiss them. We've got to empathize. We've got to find a way to sustain them. Because these were the breadwinners just a few months ago. They were bringing in more foreign exchange than anybody else. But now, they're probably going to go in limbo for some time. It could be 6 months, it could be 12, it could be 2 years. What do we do with these people? We've got to find a way to help ordinary people pick up the pieces in their lives so that they can move on. We've got to build the hope and build the momentum, because that is what is important. I think the government, in their wisdom, especially the president, he's been talking of this word called emiyoga, and people didn't understand what it is, and they've made it so political. Unfortunately, I can't be the one to give them yoga, nor can you. It's got to come from the head of state. And it's unfortunate that the timing is it's now time for election, so people are politicizing it. But he's trying to reach the ordinary person to see that there's money in their pockets. And that is so important, because that's what drives consumption. Consumption is also a stimulus for driving the economy when people can consume. And then the snowball effect, the cycle begins working there. So they can't be looking only after manufacturers at the top without addressing the ordinary people. We need to work with the ordinary people and see that money is in their pocket and keeps coming. Then we'll dig ourselves out of this hole. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Patrick Bitature, for the wisdom. We want to thank you for that wisdom that you have given, not just to the panel here, the challenges you have given to us, but also speaking to that person down there. A lot of business people really move by aspiration, not by the realities. You want to be this, so you go to borrow to put up the best salon. You haven't even checked the reality in the market, whether where you're putting your salon, somebody can actually come in and have their head worked on for 50,000. But that's the salon you have set up. And before you know it, the bank is taking it. But also there's this reality of the interlinkages of people who took salary loans, and salary loans are usually on the strength of the institution. Now the institution is gone. So what does the bank do? So we have all these kinds of challenges of the risks he talked about.
That's exactly the risk I'm talking about.
Exactly. Because all we needed to know, are you employed by Ministry of Finance? Yes, Ministry of Finance will always be there.
Yes.
Are you employed by this company? Yes. All we check is, will you be dismissed? No, you have been with the company for the last 5 years. We think you're going to stay. What is your salary? We compute. Now the company is either laying you off or the company has disappeared.
Yes.
These are the fragilities we are really talking about. And I think, Rashmi, you've been seeing some of these, or you work closely with some of these. You're the best person to speak to these realities where you see it.
So I will speak to a couple of things that Patrick Bitature and Dr. Mugume and also Mr. Ochaila have mentioned, because there were a lot of things said, but we also need to address where people at the bottom don't necessarily are demonstrating that behavior, or that behavior is detrimental to them. So first, Patrick, Mr. Bitature talked about that pyramid, right? You have your big, large corporations, but in the Uganda's case, that pyramid is largely flat. Like it's a flatter because the biggest base is these informal small businesses, which employ the majority of the youth and the population. That is where the base is very big. That's point one. Then we talked about, and I will bring all of this together. The other point we talked about was the cost of interest rate in this country, right? Because how the commercial banks price and identify risk. A lot of that comes from information asymmetry. We don't know enough about you to accurately price the risk that we are taking. So how do we reduce that information asymmetry? The easiest way, and pardon my saying this, we work in the financial sector, I have a lot of respect for everybody, but the easiest, laziest way is collateral. because that's how
Yeah.
traditionally it has been done. And I'm sorry, I am going to call it the laziest way.
Yeah.
Right? Because you just sit there and say, what can you mortgage? How many percentage of, what percentage of adult population own an asset that they can mortgage? Right? Whether that's land or a small business. Most of it's 40%. So the inherently, by virtue of using that model, you have then excluded 60% of the adult population that are not willing or cannot put down an asset that you can then very quickly price. Secondly, it is discriminatory against women. A lot of women don't assets. Men own most of the assets. Are women less business women than men? That's not true. They're better, actually. That's what the data shows. So that structural issue that Dr. Mugume talked is actually structurally discriminatory against people who are vulnerable and against people who are, and against women. Now, then let's come to the other piece that Patrick talked about. He talked about inequality. All of these structural issues that we talk, they actually worsen the inequality. Because the people who will get the support, when we talked about the president announced stimulus measures yesterday, right? Now, and this is where I would like to challenge Dr. Mugume and Patrick, is to say, if we need to, as policymakers, think in terms of incentives to achieve what we want to achieve. For example, if, say, the Ministry of Finance is like, we have to stop the bleeding for corporations, they are facing a significant challenge, a necessary measure is to give them a stimulus package. Everybody agrees with that. But is that sufficient? How do we give stimulus packages and incentivize corporations like Patrick's and others to safeguard jobs? Could we have done it in a manner that incentivizes them to actually not do that precisionally cutting that he was talking about? Because that's what we want. We want people to be able to ride the storm, and not just corporations. So that was my other point. But coming back to what can we do and what can we learn from this? The part where I agree with Mr. Butature's statement was digitization. And that's where I'll tell you why. Because that information asymmetry, digitization can reduce it. For example, if you do cash flow based lending, if I have banked with you and I'm collecting money, my inflows and outflows, you as a bank are able to see I'm a small business, or I'm you're a money lender, but I've digitized it. You will know the risk that I am carrying. And that will be, and we have actually created a portfolio of alternative credit scoring as FSD Uganda to demonstrate exactly this, that you can actually, without using collateral, figure out innovative ways of pricing risk better and giving credit to where the bottom of the pyramid or where the bulk of the pyramid is today.
Very interesting conversation that at aggregate level, we might say we'll put $1 trillion into UDB. But these realities are telling us you've just reserved it for 40% who actually have the collateral. Because as long as these banks are still using the collateral route, and even the collateral have said, even when your collateral is, Adam says here, some of the collateral can't be trusted. Because we don't know, we have piles and piles of court cases related to land which we don't know who it belongs to. So it looks like there are systemic issues that even as we put money out there to really help out with the stimulus, it may not happen. And this also speaks to institutions. What is the nature of our institutions? Are they just being lazy? Or are they going to put in that extra mile to say, I'm really going to find this potato grower. I'm going to look for this yam grower. I'm going to look for this fish person to make sure they get into that swamp, generate the fish we can export, give him more. If we had a lot of liquidity in Bank of Uganda, wouldn't be talking with IMF. What if we had reserves of $5 billion because our fish, our coffee is actually functioning? But the person supposed to finance the coffee is saying, where's your collateral? This is a poor farmer, woman possibly, a child possibly, even if it's a man, all he has is a bicycle. What are they called, chattels?
Yeah, chattels,
Not acceptable. Because that bicycle can disappear under corona. So Patrick, how are you going to really design and structure the implementation part? The budget is almost done. How do we make sure the rubber meets the road and we're able to move forward?
Thank you very much, moderator, for that challenging question. I agree with her presentation that I think the issue is really a structural issue. But I think in this 1 trillion, and UDB, as you know, is a development bank. And because of what Adam mentioned, actually, that agriculture is the worst priced in terms of the current structure, in terms of lending. I think therein comes government through its own development bank. It has got a development angle that tackles issues to deal with the area of comparative advantage, where we started from. And this resource is going to be utilized for support to the sector that we think and we believe, number one, employs quite a number of people, however informal it is. Number two, is a sector that within one season can help us produce what can help us turn around the entire economy. Three, it is in a sector that links very well with our industrialization agenda, value addition, so that don't stop exporting maize now to Kenya and then import the feeds. We now process the maize to the full length of the feed. And that money which is going to UDB, I can assure you, I do not have the details, is largely going to support agro-industrialization in this country. The sector which is least attractive to the other people. And that, I think, will help us deal with the three problems that Mr. Tature and Madam has mentioned. Number one, it will help us employ these people who are vulnerable. Number two, it will deal with the structural problem that the normal commercial banks are facing, the negative discrimination against agriculture. And yet agriculture is where we can save our economy on a sustainable basis. Number three, it will help us really engage people in the true employment on a sustainable basis, other than the employment which comes, seasons come and seasons go. You know that song in church? So it's very important that we follow up with the stimulus package, the direction under Uganda Development Bank, to ensure that truly the transformation that we want out of this money, and maybe more, we never know, if we find more money, more can be added. In fact, the shareholders actually voted to increase the shareholding to 2 trillion from 500 billion. So that was just last week. So with that 2 trillion capacity, we should then be able to continue giving them soft landing in terms of working capital for them to cover as much as possible of this great area. And not only agriculture, but also in minerals. We've been talking about agriculture most of the time, but there is a lot of mineral potential in this country as well, which, if we can fully exploit that, will be the second biggest bunker on which we are anchoring our development policy agenda. So I do not have the details about the pricing mechanism of UDB, but I have a reason to believe that the largest priority of this money is going to agriculture, agro-processing, and agro-industry. And even the shareholding from the Uganda Development Corporation, the investment arm, is actually coming to support government where private sector is not attractive to the private sector. But government feels that this area is very important for us to invest. UDC comes in to invest. Two, there may be those private sector people who, because of lack of cash and capital and whatever, cannot exercise the full potential or realize the full potential of their investments. Government comes in to take shares in order to help them, participate with them in the road to nurturing them to grow. There may be industries in agro-processing area which have been adversely affected by the demand for their products as a result of COVID, either internationally or even domestically. The UDC will come and partner with them. And there are quite a number of them. They are in cassava, they are in sugar production, they are in maize production, they are in quite a number of these other crops which actually the President mentioned. So I think we're taking this as a twin action to stimulate production on a sustainable basis, create jobs, industrialize the economy, in order to add value so that we fetch more US dollars for our balance of payment problems, and also be able to improve our revenue collection so that I don't go to borrow from the market and then increase interest rates adversely. In fact, that's a other reform fiscal measure that is enhancing revenue collection so that to a big extent you don't rely more on the treasury bills, so that those people who are now benefiting from the treasury bill auctions as a source of their revenue will very soon find that if the revenue stabilizes and actually gets enhanced, again with digitization, you know, the the strategies on revenue these days is not to go ahead for increasing rates. It's old-fashioned. It's going down, keep the rates where they are, or maybe reduce. Then concentrate on 4 major things. 1, digital stamps. I forgot to check on this water to find whether there's a digital stamp, because digital stamps have already revealed the fears that we had. Last year when we were discussing the pre-budget discussions, we saw that I did mention, and the President mentioned, and the Minister mentioned, that the Uganda Revenue Authority was waiting for the returns to come from the manufacturers, that, oh, this year, we manufacture this amount of money, these products. Therefore, the income is this, and therefore, your tax is this one. Of course, they'll go with their audits, and then they say, no, your audits are wrong, you are trying to do this, and then I don't know what happens next. And then that becomes our tax revenue. But since the installation of these digital stamps, you can't believe the numbers which are coming through. Even pre-COVID, or even in COVID, you can see the numbers that are coming through. So that's an area of digitalization which is going to give us a bigger mileage on revenue, which hitherto has not been collected as a result of under-declaration. 2, there is an issue of what you call electronic fiscal devices. That equally is going to be installed in supermarkets where there are these outlets, so that when the machine goes, as you're picking your things, real time, the tax that we're supposed to collect as URA is signaled to the collector, and your books equally signal that. And then the service provider is controlling, because that's where his paycheck is coming from. So on account of those 3 levels, we know real time how much money a supermarket has collected. Now, how many supermarkets are there in this country? And if we installed that electronic fiscal device in each of those supermarkets, your guess is as good as mine, how much revenue we can get.
Hopefully there are many, but
there are too many.
Majority of us also do shop from what is called
from the Matoke markets.
Corner shops.
Those are not yet there.
So
But I'm talking about these supermarkets. They want label supermarkets.
Of course.
So if you can install that there, then we can really know the withholding tax that's supposed to come from such low-level items, and also the SMEs who are largely now in the informal sector, and the increase on revenue base is expected to be tremendous in that area, and it doesn't have to take a long period of time for us to realize that revenue. The third area is the rental.
Yeah.
You heard the argument about tenants, landlords, etc. Of course, that is also affected, both of them, because all of them borrow. Tenants borrow to buy merchandise, and landlords borrow to to build the buildings.
Yeah.
Now there's that tension between the two. I hope then the negotiations which are going on will be settled.
But
I
also
hope
that
it will also be an avenue for the correct rent to be known.
because yes, exactly.
At times, for tax purposes, the rent is different from the rent that I pay when I rent. So I hope this tension brought about by COVID will also help government know the true earnings from landlords and
this is literally the integration that we're talking about between fiscal and monetary policy, because if the landlords who borrowed from the banks are not getting the rent, which means we are having an increase in non-performing loans,
and also the tenants,
which is certainly going to destabilize the stability of the financial sector. So I want to cross over to Dr. Adam Mugume. What measures are you having in there to really keep this balance of the boat, as they say? It's a very fragile situation globally and nationally and individually.
You're absolutely right, because it is now that is going to be more evident actually after COVID.
Yes.
Okay. Because as we open, think about it, we have encouraged the commercial banks to do loan restructuring, but most of these banks depend on income from lending. 60% of the income comes from lending. Lending means it is the loan you borrowed. But now, if I'm restructuring, it means that I'm not be able to pay for 12 months. So this bank,
for 12 months has 60% of its revenue is gone.
It automatically means it has to lay off workers also. It is also a farm. It is that's what is going on. So that's why, as Bank of Uganda, we said, okay, we also create a facility for these commercial banks not to harass the other person who is not, whose loan is being restructured, at least you can come to Bank of Uganda, get some money, not free money obviously, okay, at CBR rate. So you are able now to say, okay, 12 months, okay, also we shall give you money at CBR. So as you wait for the other person to stabilize and start repaying a loan.
Yeah.
Actually, this morning I was looking at the data from loan restructure. Do you know that people who applied for loan restructuring were 50% of the borrowers, almost, equivalent to about 8 trillion value want their loans restructured. That is out of around 17 trillion of loans. They are requesting for their own restructuring. So automatically means that yes, if we have to send the banks, otherwise you can have a bank run. So that's why we are saying, okay, commercial banks, do their own restructuring, we encourage you. Find trouble in terms of financing liquidity challenges, so long as you are viable. Okay, yes. We shall also give you money at CBR, because we know that this is actually going to happen in the next 12 months.
Yes. Yes.
So that's why, as Bank of Uganda have been putting on, those facilities. For those who have securities and they want to sell them to enhance liquidity, we actually are negotiating to see whether we can buy them. Okay? So basically, that is the mechanism we think. That is, yes, we support the commercial banks, provided is also, not that we are providing a liquidity, provided the commercial bank is also supporting the other side.
The borrower, yes.
So that's what we think that is really viable.
I think these are some of the elements of the stimulus that people have not captured. And they keep saying, you haven't done anything, and yet you've done so much. This is 8 trillion relief that could have been jeopardized in an economy of 130 trillion.
140.
And this 8 trillion is literally of those who are active. Because if you can be credible enough to borrow from a bank, you are really an active member of that economy. Formal, versatile, and as we say, the risk, the bank has looked at you and said, so these are the real ones you want to solve, shelter, so that they can survive and shelter the bottom of the pyramid and our SMEs. Rashmi, and this will be partly you are also winding up comments, so please say us what you want to tell us as we begin to wind up this conversation.
This is such an interesting debate. I'm sad it is getting over.
Yes, we wish we had 17 hours like the president did yesterday until midnight.
So there are a couple of immediate responses that I would like to leave Patrick and Dr. Mugume with, and then I will. So one of the questions that I feel that all of us need to also think additionally is, like, for example, Mr. Ochalap, when you talked about UDB, right? And we're saying, okay, we went 500 billion to now 2 trillion, a 4x kind of increase in capital base. My question then is, what should we do to ensure that 4x capital injection results in 4x capital deployment? The throughput is the same. What do we need to do? Because injection is only one part of the problem. Making sure that it is effectively and efficiently deployed, that execution is the biggest part of the problem. What do we need to do, and development partners, I'm challenging ourselves as well, of how do we support policymakers? How do we support the Bank of Uganda? What do we do? Because that cannot be left to UDB alone. That's actually a real big challenge, right? So that was one reaction that I had. The other thing is, I completely agree with you of actually broadening our tax base. And digitization is a great way of going about it. We have learned that digital economy is where we will go towards, which means that we need to make that long-term investment in digital infrastructure today. We have to figure out a way. For example, internet, the mobile phone ownership, individual mobile phone ownership, data shows is only 52%, because people like me have 2 mobile phones. But all the MNOs report it as individual, so you add the subscribers, and you think, wow, we have 20 million, 30 million, and then you're like, no. Each individual, exactly, some have 4.
And they count them 4 times. Some are for children below 8 years. Yes. This is where the parent has left it home.
That's correct. So if you look at the if you look at the adult individual owners, it's only 50%. And if you look at the adult individuals that have consistent internet access, it's less, significantly less than Kenya and our neighbors. So if we want to build long-term resilience of our economy, it might be best for us to figure out how do we invest in this now, so that everybody, including the market traders, if they want to use any of the e-commerce apps and sell their goods and produce
And pay taxes.
You will have visibility because they used an online platform. And they use a digital method of payment, because I would pay by mobile money or by a bank card. But that investment, actually, we all need to discuss how is that going to happen.
Now that means I don't have to buy in the supermarkets for you to know I bought.
Yes.
Because I'm paying through Momo Pay
Yeah.
and the other digital platforms.
And I
Then
pick
you
it
can
from
actually,
there.
you can pick it from there.
Yes.
So I think that conversation on how do we roll out internet access and this usage, not just I own, but are you using?
And the third point I wanted is that when I heard what Dr. Mugume said about, that 50% of the borrowers, and let's be frank, a large part of the population actually is not with the banking sector.
That's
These are
true.
like the bigger borrowers that are with the banking sector. They are restructuring their loans. So what are banks going to do? They are going to be a little afraid. They're like, okay, 50% is going to restructure. They're going to hold on to that liquidity that they have. How are they going to inject and give new loans? Do you see that as what should we be doing to give them comfort so that the economy can actually revive at a faster rate? I don't have an answer, but I'm sitting with a lot of economists surrounded by them, so I'm sure you do.
These are the business of the School of Economics, really. They have to continue with the research on this conversation to answer some of these questions. How will UDB deploy rightly?
Yes.
What are the risks? And then we train our students. Basically, look for what is not likely to happen. Critically review, analyze, examine. You look for what might go wrong. Stress tests, really.
And the last point that I feel is that we need to think of incentives and opportunities. For example, if the bulk of the population is with the SACCOs, not depositing MFIs, and if, say, the Bank of Uganda or the Ministry of Finances, let's support them, whether that's through Microfinance Support Center or any other mechanism that you may choose, let's also think of how do we then use this in our benefit. Let me give you an example. If you ask today the Uganda Microfinance Regulatory Authority, how many SACCOs are there in the country? For them and us, we will not, and we work with the SACCOs, we would have zero answer. We say we precisely don't know for this annual year how many SACCOs are there, because they keep, they're born and they keep change, right? So if we say, all right, we are going to support the non-deposit taking or the tier 4 and below sector, if we are saying that let's put some capital injection, technical assistance, etc., but then we force them to say, give us a plan to digitize, because we are not able to figure out the level of risk you're carrying. And if we are not able to know how much of your capital base is at risk, so if we are able to say, we will support you, but we create a give us a 2-year plan of how you're going to digitize, how you're going to report to the regulator, so that we know how much of the population is at risk if tomorrow a pandemic hits or any other worst case scenario happens. So we just need to challenge ourselves as development partners and policy makers to think in terms of, like terms and conditions, the way the banks have.
Yes,
like
they do
when we support you, there are terms.
The terms and conditions must apply here.
Yes, so we think in terms of incentives and opportunities.
And I think that's a very important thing, because Adam Mugume here can comfortably tell you 8 trillion. But we don't know how many of those tier 4 related entities would have desired also to be restructured.
Yes.
Even if we, at least to know how many are stressed, and if there was a restructuring, it's not available because we can't see them.
Yes.
But a digitalization possibly would help them to formalize and will be able to get. So your closing remarks, Dr. Mugume, as we get to the winding up.
No, I think this has been a good discussion. And but to me, where I stand, I have more hope.
Yeah.
I have hope that we are talking the right things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We are focusing on the right thing. Years ago, when we started saying the service sector as a share of GDP was higher than agriculture and manufacturing, we are all grappling. And we argue that, there's something you have skipped. You can't go to the service before you go to industry.
Yes.
But now the president comes and says, no,
Yeah.
the real sector is industry.
Yes.
So which means that actually, remember when as the share of GDP service sector was 52%,
Yeah.
everybody was saying, but you see, that's economic transformation. Remember what you study in development economics,
Yes.
that the countries go through stages.
Yes.
Agriculture, industry, and then
Services.
and
And
services.
services, yes.
So when you go to service, then you are happy that you are developing. But I remember it was about 10 or so years ago, we say, no, please. You have jumped industry.
A step, yeah.
You can't go to
Yeah.
service. You'll come back.
Yeah.
Now, the president come and say, you know what? Industry is
Yes.
important. I think we are talking about
Yeah.
the right thing.
Yeah.
We are talking about all this digitalization, tax revenue, whatever you see. To me, that's why I summarize as saying, okay, we need financial sector development. When you have financial sector is developed, it is digital. You don't need to carry cash to buy even tomatoes. You can use your mobile money, your card to pay whatever. So that is financial sector development we are talking about.
Yes.
So once you start talking about that language, to me, we are in the right direction. And I think I have a lot of hope that
Yes.
actually, years to come, we shall not be people are talking about the banana republic ETC sometime back. To me, I think we're in the right direction.
That's encouraging to hear from the central bank, but also speaking to the realities. And even as we recognize that we had skipped industry, we like it that the National Development Plan 3, thanks to the people at the National Planning Authority and the Ministry of Finance, have now linked agriculture with industry.
Yep.
Because we are yet to transition really from agriculture.
Yep.
So we're not just going to jump into industry because this is 2020. No, we need to link the two because a lot of people need to be in agriculture. Agriculture needs to grow as well, but as it's growing the rest. So I think we are in the right direction, as you've said. Patrick, you have your last word.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for a great panel, and thank you very much for a great moderator. I think the last words are basically take-home messages.
Yes.
Take-home message number one is that this external shock is threatened our forecast growth. Of course, we thought that the GDP this year would go to 140 trillion. Which is about $37 billion. If you compare it to the world GDP, it's about world GDP is 87 trillion. So you can really see the size of our economy in relation to the rest of the world.
Yes.
That's 0.04% of world economy. That's the size of our economy. But it's big.
And if the other one is shrinking,
Yes, this one, if the other one is shrinking,
yes, we need to
which
not
is
to
our
shrink.
market,
We
which
shouldn't
is our-
shrink.
Which is our market for exports.
Sure.
Then I think we need to go back to the drawing board, and I thank His Excellency President for really taking us back to real economy.
Yep.
That's a big take-home message. Go back to the real economy, and let's do the necessary linkages in the economy to make agriculture really work. Lesson number two is that the large informal sector, which has been rudely shocked, now needs to be formalized and reorganized using the existing opportunities in digitization, a high level of organization that's necessary for us to put them together into the mainstream formal sector. I talked about borders. You can talk about also the informal logistics industry. You could see how these people who are supplying food, they developed application. Ugandans are very innovative.
Yep.
Application for delivery of food from where it is to where it's demanded, even cooked food.
And they need to access internet.
I need to access internet.
Exactly. We see the
Then
point now. Yeah.
That tells you the link between agriculture, digitization, and the necessary formalization of the informal sector, which has been missing. And the offsprings out of that formalization of the informal sector are immense in terms of creating a wider base for us to grow the economy and also come back to a normal situation in a shorter time than what most people think. And that's a sustainable way in which we can bring them on board. And of course, to me, from where I sit, it's music because it expands my tax base. And I do not have to inconvenience the private sector in the market for the money domestically. Neither do I have to run every time to external sources for borrowing to finance the fiscal deficit. Number three is that the health sector, and I think education sector in this case, we need to generate adequate scientists, particularly for the research angle on agriculture, linked to agriculture. I want the varieties of everything else in the agriculture sector to be properly researched, the mechanism for tracing the production of all agricultural commodities for both domestic and external trade must be put in place scientifically. And we must evacuate that technology from that point of research to the point of production in an organized manner. Finally, I think climate change, because during COVID, the president mentioned, and it was true, that we are hit by aspects related to climate change. The rising levels of Lake Victoria, the locust, and also the floods, the flash floods in Rwenzori, etc. What do we need to do? I think as we do this, because agriculture is our mainstay, it's very important that we pay attention to the green culture development economy, smart agriculture activities that encourage solar powered irrigation of all forms for agriculture to truly thrive, to supply constantly the industry and the domestic consumption as well as the markets consistently without erratic supply throughout the year.
Yes.
Because the example I gave in my place where I know better, Amuria side there, you'll find that those women around there make about, in dry season, where people in Teso normally sit and just relax and enjoy their traditional drinks, you'll find that the tomatoes they produce, the watermelons they produce, it's about 25 million for that group of close to 100 women in a dry season. And dry season is quite long, December to almost March. So in those 3 months, 25 million in 100 women, which is about divide by the number of households, how many women per household, you'll come to a number of about 30 households, getting about 7 million in that period. So you can see the transformative technologies that are necessary for us to truly turn this economy, and it can be turned in the shortest possible time. I won't give it more than 2 financial years, and we're back to a very high level of
let's prove everybody wrong, like we have done with corona statistics in Uganda, that even while the other global economy is in recession and receding, Uganda has the potential to really bounce back. But this conversation we are having here needs to go down there and meet the realities of the people. And we have identified quite a number of some of the challenges in this conversation that may actually hold back, even that when the stimulus is out there, that the wheels may not turn, and yet these wheels must turn. And this is the conversation we are going to continue with. Don't just have that phone, get it on the net, and don't just go on the net to gossip. Go on the net to do business. Transform yourself. Patrick Bitature, want to appreciate you. Really gave us some good, candid conversation and advice to the SMEs. Sell your chapatis online. Don't be a hawker on the street. Sell them on the platform. Do everything that is available. The technology is available. The opportunities are out there. Things are going to be sorted out, a number of them, but even if they are not sorted out, please do something and then raise that voice. We are here to listen to those voices and have government make a response to them, because government can only respond to the voices people have raised. Community seeds, we have discovered majority of Ugandans don't grow the seed that comes from our agricultural research organization. So how do we transform and roll out community seed? Because people usually plant the seed grown in their village. How do we make sure it's not what they planned to eat that they are preserving to grow and in the next season, but actually they have standard community seed, standard fish. Adulteration, what do we do with those adulteration things? These are the fiscal policy issues. But every time we succeed, we reduce on our imports, we increase on our exports, we make Adam's life easy, because now he will not go to IMF, he will have sufficient reserves to stabilize that dollar. You may never have seen the dollar, but the dollar sees you through your higher transport costs, through your higher tariffs, through your higher airtime. Those things that are getting eventually imported translate to your desk and then make your life a little bit miserable. We need stability in this. I want once again to thank my panelists. Patrick Ochale from Ministry of Finance, thank you very much. Rashmi Pillai from Financial Sector Deepening Uganda, thank you very much. Dr. Adam Mugume, thank you very much. Go and hold out there at the Bank of Uganda. You are at the central bank. You are at the center. If the center can't hold, we don't know where to go. But thank you for holding it. You have held macroeconomic stability. And we also want to thank you, our viewers, want to thank our sponsors, Bill and Melinda Gates, Bank of Uganda, Frederick Ebert Foundation, the School of Economics, for bringing this conversation to you. We hope you have learned something as a person out there, and you're going to do something different. We have a very tricky 12 months. For some people it is shorter, others it may be longer. Rashmi has told that there are those who may not come back. Please don't join those who are not coming back. It's within your power to come back. We want you alive. We have defeated Corona almost. Thank you very much, viewers, and thank you very much, everybody.